You know, when you break your arm, the X-ray is pretty binary.
Right.
I mean, the jagged white line is just right there on the film. The doctor points to it, and, well, you know exactly what's broken.
Exactly. It's undeniable.
But look at Tamil Nadu's power grid this summer. The state has 21,000 megawatts of power actively flowing through it.
Which is a massive amount of power.
It really is. And the official utility insists there is no statewide generation shortage. Yet entire manufacturing districts in Coimbatore and, high-density neighborhoods in Chennai are just sitting in the dark at midnight.
Yeah.
It is a complete diagnostic paradox. The X-ray says the bone is fine, but the patient is in agonizing pain.
And that pain is not just a matter of public discomfort, right?
Right.
It's a profound economic hemorrhage.
Right.
For a state like Tamil Nadu, which serves as one of India's most heavily industrialized and, urbanized engines, the electricity grid isn't just a utility.
It's everything.
Exactly. It is the fundamental prerequisite for its sovereign credit rating and its entire industrial future.
Yeah.
I mean, if we look strictly at the data from the Central Electricity Authority and those Emberset 2024 reports, the blackouts under the newly formed TVK administration are exposing a really systemic vulnerability.
Yeah, a massive one.
When the power fails, the entire economic apparatus from automotive supply chains down to micro-machining enterprises, it effectively just seizes up.
And that is exactly the core of our investigation today. Because for you listening, you are watching a crisis unfold that touches literally every level of society.
Totally.
From mass electronics plants on the outskirts of Chennai to, a family just trying to boil water before school.
Right.
So the immediate question you might have is whether these unannounced rolling blackouts are simply the result of an abnormally brutal summer heat wave, a sudden failure of governance by a new administration, or the inevitable collapse of a long-decaying infrastructure that has finally just reached its breaking point.
Yeah, that's the big question.
So today, we're going to analyze a massive stack of sources. We've got state budgets, utility balance sheets from the newly unbundled power corporations, legislative research data, and our mission is to map out the fiscal and technical realities on the ground.
And our methodology here, it really demands a strict separation of political theater from verified structural impediments.
Right, we have to cut through the noise.
Exactly. We cannot just look at the symptoms. We have to actually do the math behind the utility company's massive compounding debt.
Yeah.
We need to evaluate the physical limitations of the grid hardware itself, and we have to scrutinize whether the current administration's responses are, well, commensurate with the sheer scale of the macroeconomic threat they are managing.
So to understand the policy failures, I think we have to start with the physics of the grid itself.
Always a good place to start.
Right, because the demand surge this summer is, frankly, staggering. I mean, Tamil Nadu's peak power demand breached the 21,000 megawatt mark multiple times.
Yeah, hitting an all-time record of 21,060 megawatts.
Which is huge. Chennai alone pushed past 5,014 megawatts. But looking at the sources, what strikes me isn't just the sheer volume of power being drawn, but the timing.
The timing is everything.
Yeah, this temporal shift in consumption, it changes the entire engineering equation, doesn't it?
It changes it entirely because grid infrastructure was fundamentally designed around a totally different human behavioral pattern.
Right, daytime peaks.
Exactly. Historically, peak demand in Indian states occurred during the daytime. It was driven by industrial operation, with a secondary, much smaller peak right after sunset when, residential lighting was switched on.
Yeah, people come home from work.
Right. But the summer of 2026 has witnessed these prolonged, massive demand peaks extending from 10:30 p.m. all the way to 3:30 a.m.
And that's because of the relentless ambient temperatures.
Exactly.
I mean, the state has been hovering between 36 and 41 degrees Celsius. When it stays that hot deep into the night, you have millions of households simultaneously running air conditioners and coolers, just continuously until dawn.
Which leads directly to the physical breakdown of the distribution hardware.
Right.
See, the public often assumes a blackout means a power plant just stopped burning coal or a turbine stopped spinning.
Like a total supply failure.
Right, a generation deficit.
Yeah.
But the data shows we are dealing primarily with localized grid failures. Substations, local feeder lines, distribution transformers, these are mechanical components that operate under intense, continuous thermal stress.
They heat up as the power flows through them.
They literally heat up as current passes through them. And historically, they relied on the natural drop in nighttime temperatures to dissipate that built-up thermal load.
So they needed a cooling off period.
They desperately needed a cooling off period.
So without that ambient temperature drop, the equipment is basically denied its recovery cycle.
Yeah.
The thermal stress just compounds hour after hour.
Precisely. With zero cooling periods overnight, the physical degradation is rapid and it's violent. The insulation materials within these units start to break down. The oil that's used for cooling inside the transformers begins to actually boil, or it loses its dielectric strength.
And the localized mechanical failures detailed in these reports are just visceral.
Yeah, they are.
We are seeing blown fuse-off calls, underground cable faults, jumper cuts, and snapped overhead conductors.
It's failing everywhere.
And in high-density urban areas, places like Tinagar, the East Coast Road, Kalamazoo, they are reporting instances of ring main units, or RMUs, literally catching fire and burning out.
Yeah, which is a major, major issue.
And for you listening, an RMU is essentially a large enclosed switchgear unit used in underground cable networks to safely route power to different city blocks.
Exactly.
When a solid dielectric or gas-insulated RMU burns out from thermal overload, it's not a quick fix. You don't just flip a breaker back on, right?
Oh, absolutely not. It takes hours, sometimes days, for heavy technical crews to safely isolate the fault, excavate the street if necessary, and completely replace the unit.
Leaving entire commercial and residential blocks completely paralyzed.
And the socioeconomic compounding of that paralysis is severe. I mean, the human cost begins with widespread sleep deprivation,
Right.
which heavily affects the elderly, children, and remote workers who, rely on nighttime hours to sync with global time zones.
Yeah, the IT sector is huge there.
Exactly. But then it cascades into the morning, because the state has also been simultaneously dealing with a localized LPG cylinder shortage.
Right, which forces massive numbers of households to rely on electric induction stoves just to cook their food.
So think about what happens when these thermally stressed transformers finally trip or fail between 6:00 a.m. and 8:30 a.m.
It's chaos.
It completely severs morning routines. Families literally cannot cook breakfast. School preparation is thrown into total chaos.
And it extends deep into the agricultural and commercial sectors, too.
Oh, massive.
Farmers in districts heavily reliant on groundwater are facing acute water stress. Commercial crops like turmeric and sugarcane require strict irrigation schedules. If the grid cannot maintain steady voltage to run a 10-horsepower agricultural pump, the crop yields just plummet.
They do.
But the most alarming impact detailed in the sources is really on the MSMEs, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, especially in manufacturing hubs like Coimbatore.
Yeah, the MSME sector is the absolute backbone of Tamil Nadu's industrial output. But it operates on incredibly tight margins.
Right.
A massive multinational automotive plant might have the capital to install, industrial-scale diesel backup generation.
Sure, they can weather the storm.
Exactly. But a small casting, machining, or textile unit does not. Unannounced outages mean idle labor costs. They are paying workers to just stand in the dark.
Oh, wow.
And if a precision thermal or chemical process is interrupted by a voltage drop, the raw materials are spoiled and have to be scrapped.
So they lose the materials and the time.
Right. To survive, they are forced to rely on highly expensive localized diesel generators, which just completely erodes their profitability.
The operational costs skyrocket while productivity crashes.
Exactly. And the sources even cite reports of the crisis affecting secondary healthcare facilities, forcing the really perilous transfer of ICU patients when local backup systems fail during these prolonged multi-hour cuts.
Okay, but I have to push back on the premise of the official narrative here.
Yeah.
Blaming the weather feels like an intellectually lazy defense for any administration.
Yeah, it's easy out.
Right. It is the tropics. It gets hot every summer. It is completely predictable.
Yeah, it's not a surprise.
I look at the grid like a highway system during a planned evacuation. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million cars, which is the megawatt generation, and plenty of gas.
Okay.
If you force all of those cars onto a single, degraded, poorly maintained 2-lane bridge at exactly 11:00 p.m., that bridge is going to structurally fail under the weight.
That's a great analogy.
Isn't an electrical grid supposed to be engineered with an operational buffer for exactly this kind of predictable seasonal stress?
You are identifying the exact structural vulnerability here. I mean, the extreme heat is merely the catalyst. It is absolutely not the root cause.
Right.
A robustly maintained grid built with adequate capacity margins and modern thermal tolerances, should easily absorb a 41-degree peak.
It should be built for that.
Exactly. The fact that the localized equipment is failing so spectacularly across multiple districts simultaneously, it points to a system that has been running constantly at the red line.
With zero buffer.
With absolutely zero engineering buffer.
And because this failure is so visceral, affecting everything from a family's sleep to a factory's survival, it instantly mutates from an engineering problem into a fierce political battleground.
Oh, immediately.
The optics for the newly formed TVK administration are just incredibly volatile right now. We are seeing viral videos of midnight street protests in neighborhoods like Ambato and Parambar.
Yeah, people are angry.
Residents are physically blocking roads, demanding accountability and power restoration.
And if you monitor the online sentiment, particularly on forums like the Tamil Nadu subreddits, the public frustration is just palpable.
It's everywhere.
Small industry owners are posting these detailed rants about their daily production losses. You see sarcastic posts heavily, thanking the chief minister for turning the state into a manufacturing capital, accompanied by videos of completely dark factory floors.
Wow.
Now, to be clear to you, the listener, these social media posts represent raw public opinion and frustration. They are not verified technical audits.
Right. We have to separate fact from sentiment.
However, they serve as a critical metric of public trust and, more importantly, investor confidence.
And the political opposition has capitalized heavily on this erosion of trust. Looking at the claims impartially, the AIEDMK, led by Edappadi K. Palaniswamy, has framed this as a fundamental failure of foresight by the TVK government.
Yeah, EPS has been very vocal.
He cites established projections showing that the state's electricity requirement will hit 23,013 megawatts by 2026-27. His argument is that the administration knew the industrial base was growing, they knew electric vehicle adoption was surging, and they simply failed to plan for the corresponding load. He is demanding granular, district-wise data transparency on generation and power procurement.
Simultaneously, you have the DMK's Senthil Balaji launching a scathing critique, characterizing the crisis as pure administrative incompetence.
Yeah, he didn't hold back.
He points to historical data, claiming that under the previous DMK regime, peak demand hit 20,974 megawatts in April 2026, and they managed that load without triggering widespread systemic outages.
So he's saying the demand isn't new.
Exactly. He accuses the current government of engaging in distraction tactics rather than deploying technical war-footing measures.
Which brings us to the TVK administration's actual public messaging, which I find genuinely baffling from a crisis communication standpoint.
It was certainly an interesting choice.
Right. Energy Minister CTR Nirmal Kumar held a press conference where he suggested that the power cuts might not be entirely technical. He publicly alleged that sabotage by certain individuals and the targeted theft of copper fuse carriers were causing the disruptions. He explicitly warned of swift action against a 1% black sheep within the electricity workforce who might be intentionally destabilizing the grid.
And from an analytical perspective, that messaging is highly problematic.
That doesn't make sense.
I mean, does localized theft of copper infrastructure occur? Yes, absolutely. It is a documented issue in utility management globally.
Sure.
But the physics of the grid completely undermines sabotage as a macro-level explanation.
Right.
How does the daytime theft of a localized fuse carrier physically cause massive simultaneous statewide blackouts across multiple districts during peak nighttime thermal loads?
It doesn't.
Exactly. When a ring main unit burns out from thermal overload in T Nagar at 11:30 p.m., that is the immutable law of thermodynamics, not a rogue employee stealing a wire.
It reads as a deliberate deflection. They are trying to treat a structural engineering crisis as a localized law enforcement issue.
Yeah, which is a mistake.
But the consequence of that deflection is immense. If you are an MSME owner in Coimbatore hemorrhaging capital, every hour your machines are idle, you don't want to hear conspiracy theories about a 1% black sheep.
No, you need actual answers.
You need technical reassurance. You need the administration to explain load balancing protocols, transformer upgrade timelines, and concrete repair schedules.
Exactly.
When the government pivots to narratives of sabotage, it destroys business confidence because it signals to investors that the administration either does not comprehend the technical root cause of the grid's failure or they are willfully refusing to admit it.
And if we look past the political theater and listen to the utility operators themselves, a much clearer, albeit grimmer, picture emerges.
Right.
TENGETCO chairman and managing director J. Radhakrishnan has consistently maintained that there is no statewide generation shortage.
And he has the data for that.
He does. He supports this by pointing out that statewide usage consistently remains above 20,000 megawatts during these periods. If there were a true systemic supply deficit, the grid would collapse entirely, and that overall usage number would plummet.
So he is validating that the megawatt capacity exists in the wires, but it is bottlenecking and failing at the localized distribution endpoints.
Yes.
He points to aging legacy transformers and specific physical vulnerabilities. For example, he cited how the sudden transition from extreme summer heat to high-velocity monsoon winds causes ceramic insulators, known locally as pinggan, to physically snap.
Yeah, the thermal shock.
Right, ceramic is highly susceptible to thermal shock. It becomes brittle in the heat and shatters under sudden mechanical stress from the wind.
But, identifying a shattered ceramic insulator is only step one.
Right.
Step two requires a human being to physically climb a utility pole, safely isolate the high voltage line, and replace the hardware. And this is where we uncover the most staggering structural reality of the entire crisis.
A labor deficit.
The state's catastrophic labor deficit.
The numbers presented in the source documents are almost difficult to comprehend for a state of this size.
They really are.
The Tamil Nadu electricity sector realistically requires a workforce of roughly 1.4 lakh employees to safely and efficiently maintain the vast network of transmission and distribution lines.
Yeah.
Currently, the actual workforce sits at about 68,000.
And that translates to a vacancy rate exceeding 51%.
That's unbelievable.
But the composition of that deficit is what makes it so lethal to grid stability.
Right, it's about who is missing.
Exactly. Of those missing personnel, there is a gaping deficit of 46,000 frontline field staff.
Wow.
These are the wiremen, the field engineers, the specialized technicians, the actual human capital required to physically repair the grid.
Think about the logistical nightmare that creates.
Yeah.
Imagine a massive urban substation that feeds 40 different high-density neighborhoods.
Okay.
At 11:00 p.m., the ambient heat combined with the air conditioning load causes 10 different feeder lines to trip simultaneously.
Right.
But because of that 51% labor deficit, the utility only has 2 technicians on duty for that entire sector. It is a physical impossibility for 2 humans to safely troubleshoot, isolate, and repair 10 high-voltage lines at once.
They just physically can't do it.
Right. The blackout isn't lasting 4 hours because the repair is complex. It's lasting 4 hours because you are simply waiting in a queue for an exhausted technician to finish the 9 jobs ahead of yours.
And that reactive posture is the defining failure of the system. I mean, this labor deficit hasn't just caused painfully slow emergency repair times this summer. It has generated a compounding 7-year backlog of preventative maintenance.
7 years.
7 years. High-voltage grid infrastructure requires rigorous quarterly, half-yearly, and annual maintenance cycles.
You can't just ignore it.
No, technicians must manually clean carbon buildup off contacts. They have to verify thermal tolerances with infrared scanners, check the dielectric strength of transformer oil, and torque down mechanical connections that, loosen over time due to microvibrations.
And none of that is happening.
For 7 years, the utility has been operating in a state of pure triage. They have abandoned the preventive cycle almost entirely, only dispatching crews to fix hardware after it has already catastrophically failed and plunged a neighborhood into darkness.
But the neglect isn't isolated to just the wires and transformers, is it? It extends all the way up the supply chain to the power plants themselves.
It really does.
The sources detail a decade-long failure in demand forecasting and baseload power procurement. Despite knowing the industrial and residential demand was scaling rapidly, Tamil Nadu has not commissioned a major new state-owned generation plant in 5 years.
5 years?
That inertia has created a permanent 1,500 megawatt deficit in their required surplus capacity buffer.
They have basically gambled the state's energy security on several massive state-owned thermal baseload projects that have been mired in developmental hell for years.
Yeah, let's talk about those.
Look at the Udangudi supercritical project. Unit 1 only recently managed to achieve initial grid synchronization. The project suffered massive delays due to complex contractual disputes, supply chain breakdowns during the pandemic, and massive logistical hurdles.
So it's way behind schedule.
Oh, its actual commercial operation date was continuously pushed. It's currently targeting mid-2026, and Unit 2 remains pending.
And the other projects are in even worse shape. The Ennore SEZ project is reportedly only 70% complete and is heavily bogged down in complex legal disputes regarding financing and execution.
Right.
The Ennore expansion project actually saw its primary contractor, BGRESL, formally terminated by the state for chronic poor performance, which brought construction to a complete grinding halt.
That's completely stopped.
And then you have the 1,600-megawatt Upper Thermal project, which has been paralyzed by extensive environmental litigation and sustained protests from local fishing communities concerned about the ecological impact of the plant's cooling water discharge on marine life.
When you aggregate all these failures, the architecture of the crisis becomes undeniable.
It's a perfect storm.
You have a physical distribution grid that is decaying from a 7-year maintenance deficit, an operational workforce that is missing 46,000 essential field personnel, and 0 new state-owned baseload generation coming online to provide an engineering buffer.
Wait, if the state utility operators know these 40-year-old transformers are going to melt every May under the AC load, why don't they just preemptively replace the hardware in January?
Right.
Why allow the 7-year maintenance backlog to accumulate if you know it leads to systemic collapse?
Well, because to answer that, you have to pull up their balance sheet.
The money.
And that leads us into the deepest, most systemic issue outlined in the sources, the fiscal black hole.
Okay.
You cannot purchase new copper wire, you cannot recruit and train 46,000 new technicians, and you definitely cannot finance billion-dollar supercritical coal plants without massive amounts of liquid capital.
And they don't have it.
The financial health of Tamil Nadu's power sector is not just poor, it borders on insolvency.
In April 2024, the government actually attempted a major structural reform to address this. They unbundled the massive monolithic state utility, Tanganyika, breaking it into 3 distinct corporate entities.
Yeah, TNPDCL, TNPDCL, and TNGECL.
Right, so TNPDCL handles all distribution to consumers. TNPGCL manages state-owned generation plants, and TNGCL focuses specifically on green and renewable energy.
And on paper, the logic of unbundling is sound public policy.
It makes sense.
The goal is to isolate operational liabilities, mandate transparent accounting, and theoretically improve efficiency by having dedicated management teams for generation versus distribution.
So you know exactly who is losing money.
Exactly. It prevents the losses of one division from being hidden within the revenues of another.
But unbundling a corporation does not magically vaporize its accumulated debt. It simply categorizes it into different folders.
Yeah, the debt is still there.
And the balance sheets revealed in the Emberset 2024 report and state legislative analyses are staggering. The combined utility debt stands at 1.80 lakh crore rupees. Let me emphasize the scale of that number to the listeners. 1.80 lakh crore.
It's massive. And to dissect that further, the newly formed distribution arm, TNPDCL, inherited the lion's share of that toxic ledger.
Poor guys.
Yeah. They currently hold 1.0 lakh crore rupees in long-term non-current liabilities, stacked on top of another 80,074 crore rupees in immediate current liabilities.
Just explain exactly how a state utility manages to hemorrhage that much capital.
Let's do it.
It fundamentally comes down to a critical utility metric called the ACS-AR gap. That stands for the average cost of supply versus the average revenue realization.
Right.
In simple terms, it is the mathematical difference between exactly how much it costs the utility to generate and transmit and deliver a single unit of electricity to your meter versus exactly how much revenue they actually collect from you for that unit.
And officially, on their public-facing ledgers, the state reports this ACS-ARR gap as a seemingly manageable 0.12 rupees per unit.
Which doesn't sound that bad.
Right. A loss of 12 pays per unit sounds like a minor inefficiency. But that figure is a really dangerous accounting illusion.
Because of the bailout.
Exactly. It actively masks a massive systemic state government bailout. The state is quietly injecting a loss compensation grant of 16,076 crore rupees directly into the utility just to artificially plug the gap.
Which means taxpayer money that could be building schools, hospitals, or highways is being diverted just to keep the utility from defaulting.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity cost.
If you strip away that 16,076 crore rupee taxpayer bailout and look at the raw operational math, the true ACS-AR gap is a highly unsustainable 1.52 rupees lost on every single unit of power sold across the state.
And the primary driver of that massive operational loss is their power purchase costs.
Where they get the electricity.
Right. Remember those delayed state-owned baseload projects we discussed at Udangudi and Ennore, Upper?
The ones sitting in developmental hell.
Because those plants aren't generating the cheap baseload power the state needs, the utility is forced to go to the open, short-term energy exchanges to buy power from private generators just to meet that surging 21,000 megawatt demand.
And buying power on the spot market during a heat wave is incredibly expensive.
It's exorbitant. The financial documents show that over 75% of the utility's total income is devoured by these external power purchases.
75%.
Yes. Out of a total collected income of roughly 1,417 crore rupees, a staggering 75,960 crore goes straight out the door just to buy external electricity.
Which leaves them with less than 25% of their revenue to accomplish the impossible.
Literally impossible.
They have to pay the salaries and pensions of their 68,000 existing employees, somehow recruit 46,000 more, service the crippling interest payments on 1.8 lakh crore of accumulated debt, and try to find spare capital to buy new transformers and copper wire.
The mathematics of their daily operations simply do not work. It is a recipe for continuous physical decay.
And this fiscal collapse connects directly to the listener's wallet.
It always does.
To try and plug this gaping hole without causing a political uprising, the utility operates under a multi-year tariff framework, which is approved by the state electricity regulators.
Right.
This framework mandates automatic annual tariff revisions that are inextricably linked to consumer inflation indices.
And the historical impact of this framework on the consumer is brutal.
Yeah.
Just look at the data for the middle-class consumption slab households utilizing between 201 and 500 units. Their cost for electricity has effectively doubled over the last decade, surging from roughly 2.50 rupees per unit to an aggressive tier sliding between 4.70 and 6.3 rupees.
That's a huge jump.
And for the highest domestic consumption slabs, the rate has spiked to 11.55 rupees per unit.
But here's the critical policy friction.
Yeah.
Even with these relentless domestic price hikes, the utility still isn't covering its true operational costs.
Not even close.
A massive portion of this deficit is driven by the state's long-standing policy of providing free or heavily subsidized agricultural power. To offset the massive losses incurred by giving power away for free to millions of agricultural pump sets, the utility aggressively hikes tariffs on commercial and industrial consumers. This is the mechanism of cross-subsidization.
Which loops us right back to the existential threat to Tamil Nadu's long-term economic sustainability.
Exactly.
If you utilize cross-subsidization to make commercial power exorbitantly expensive, you directly threaten the viability of the manufacturing sector that actually built the state's wealth.
Right, the MSMEs.
If you are an MSME owner in Coimbatore, you are already bleeding capital running expensive diesel generators to survive the unannounced night blackouts.
Yeah.
If the utility then hands you a commercial tariff bill that is 40% higher than what an industrialist pays in a neighboring state, your business model collapses.
You can't compete.
You don't innovate. You simply relocate your factory to Gujarat or Karnataka where the grid is stable and the tariffs are rational. That capital flight is the macroeconomic death spiral of a failing grid.
So the utility is effectively living paycheck to paycheck, using high-interest credit cards to buy short-term private power just to keep the lights on today, leaving zero liquid capital to fix the melting wires for tomorrow.
That's exactly what's happening.
The Emberset 2024 report contextualizes this perfectly. When evaluated against peer industrial states, Tamil Nadu exhibits dangerously low structural readiness for the energy transition.
Yeah, they are severely lagging.
They are dragging an annual interest burden of roughly 10,000 crore rupees. That interest payment acts as a massive anchor on the state's budget.
It just drags everything down.
True economic sustainability isn't just about fixing the wires. It requires a radical, painful restructuring of this balance sheet so that state capital can flow into building modern, resilient, smart grids, rather than just servicing the toxic legacy debt of the past decade.
So having mapped out the diagnostic reality, the physical thermal collapse of the hardware, the devastating 51% labor deficit, and the mathematically unsustainable 1.8 lakh crore fiscal black hole, we must critically evaluate the TVK administration's response. With the public heavily outraged and industrial capital threatening to flee, are the measures being deployed by the government actually commensurate with the structural threat?
We really have to evaluate their response on two distinct timelines: emergency triage and long-term modernization.
Okay, let's start with triage.
On the immediate emergency front, Minister Nirmal Kumar announced the deployment of 10 high-level monitoring teams and 125 special mobile units dedicated solely to stabilizing Chennai and its immediate industrial suburbs.
Yeah.
Recognizing that their central complaint helpline, Menagam, was completely overwhelmed and collapsing under the call volume, they decentralized the system, setting up 77 local fuse-off call centers to route complaints directly to local substations.
And most critically for the physical decay, he publicly committed to recruiting 15,000 permanent employees to begin plugging that massive frontline labor deficit.
Those are necessary triage steps, but they are entirely reactive.
True.
Where the policy becomes genuinely fascinating is in their long-term modernization strategy. To fix the distribution network, TNPDCL is utilizing the Revamped Distribution Sector Scheme, or RDSS.
Right.
The core of Phase 1 is the ambitious rollout of 1.44 crore smart meters.
And the mechanics of how they are executing this rollout are really crucial to understand. They are not buying these meters outright. They don't have the capital for that.
Right, because of the debt.
Exactly. They are utilizing a DDFU model design, build, finance, own, operate, and transfer.
Let's explain exactly how DBFU functions in this context.
So under DBFU, private advanced metering infrastructure providers, or AMI companies, take on the massive upfront capital risk.
Okay.
They pay to manufacture, install, and network the smart meters across the state. They maintain ownership and operate the data network for a contracted concession period, typically around 8 to 10 years.
So the state doesn't own them initially?
No. The cash-strapped state utility simply pays the private provider back on a fixed per-meter, per-month rental basis. At the end of the concession period, ownership of the hardware finally transfers back to the state.
The strategic value of smart meters goes far beyond just eliminating the human meter reader, though.
Oh, absolutely.
They are intentionally targeting high-tension industrial consumers and the high-capacity distribution transformers first. A smart meter allows for highly granular, real-time energy auditing.
It gives them visibility.
Exactly. The utility control room can see exactly how much current is leaving a transformer and exactly how much is arriving at the endpoints. If there is a discrepancy, they instantly know they have a transmission loss, a physical leak, or active power theft without ever deploying a field crew.
However, the implementation is facing massive friction.
The unions.
The state utility employee unions are fiercely protesting the DBFO rollout. They view handing over critical metering data infrastructure to private corporations as privatization by stealth.
Which is a valid concern for them.
And they legitimately fear it will lead to the permanent obsolescence and termination of thousands of human meter reading jobs.
Another incredibly vital piece of long-term policy is their approach to the agricultural sector through the PM-KUSUM scheme.
This is a big one.
We established that providing massive amounts of free, unmetered power to farmers is a primary driver of the utility's fiscal ruin. PM-KUSUM is an attempt to alter the fundamental physics and economics of that equation.
It is a highly engineered policy intervention, and it has 3 specific operational components.
Let's break those down.
Component B provides farmers with standalone, off-grid solar pump sets, which are heavily subsidized by the government up to 60%.
So they don't even need the grid.
Right. Component C focuses on solarizing existing grid-connected agricultural pumps, allowing the farmer not just to draw power, but to generate it and actually sell the excess back into the state grid.
But component A is the most economically transformative, isn't it?
Oh, without a doubt.
Because a farmer with barren or fallow land can lease that acreage to a private solar developer for a guaranteed 25-year period. The sources indicate that under this model, a farmer can secure a reliable, weather-independent income of roughly 60,000 rupees per acre per year simply in lease payments.
The macroeconomic brilliance of PM-KUSUM, if successfully scaled, is twofold.
Yeah.
First, it directly chips away at the utility's massive agricultural cross-subsidy burden, slowly transforming farmers from pure liabilities on the balance sheet into independent energy producers.
Which helps the bottom line.
Second, and more immediately relevant to the blackouts, it fundamentally alters the physical load on the grid.
Right, because of when they use the power.
Exactly. By migrating hundreds of thousands of heavy 10-horsepower agricultural water pumps off the highly stressed nighttime grid and transitioning them to run on decentralized, localized solar power during the peak daytime hours, you physically stabilize the voltage available for urban residential and commercial centers at night.
We also must examine the raw budgetary interventions. You can't fix a 1.8 lakh crore debt with just solar panels.
No, you definitely cannot.
According to the PR's budget analysis for 2025-26, the state government is executing a massive, historically unprecedented 3,973% increase in energy capital outlay.
That's a staggering percentage.
It is. The state is forcibly injecting 5,000 crore rupees in direct equity into TMPDCL, alongside an allocation of 7,700 crore rupees specifically earmarked for loss funding.
They are finally being forced to open the sovereign state coffers to aggressively recapitalize the utility, rather than just allowing it to quietly accumulate more high-interest debt on the shadow ledgers.
Right.
But, they are executing this massive bailout against a backdrop of intense mounting national pressure. The draft Electricity Amendment Bill of 2025, circulating at the central government level, is pushing aggressively for the outright privatization of state distribution networks to force operational efficiency.
And the states are fighting that.
State unions and regional political factions are fiercely resisting this, fearing that privatization will instantly annihilate the cross-subsidies that protect poor consumers and permanently erode the state's sovereign autonomy over its own industrial policy.
So we see the government mobilizing massive machinery. They are throwing billions in direct equity at the balance sheet, initiating the DBFE rollout of millions of smart meters, and attempting to solarize the agricultural base.
Yeah, they're doing a lot.
But we have to compare these long-term policy promises with immediate public expectations. If you are that MSME owner in Coimbatore bleeding capital on diesel generators tonight because the thermal stress just incinerated your local ring main unit, does a smart meter scheduled for installation in late 2027 offer you any tangible relief?
And that is the exact crux of the administration's political crisis.
It doesn't help them today.
No, it doesn't. The emergency measures, the 125 mobile triage units, the 77 localized call centers, they are absolutely necessary, but they are entirely reactive and dangerously late. The TVK administration is arguably architecting the correct long-term solutions for the future grid through smart metering, PM-Q, and massive equity infusions. But their failure was in immediate crisis forecasting, proactive summer readiness, and transparent public communication.
They failed the PR battle.
Completely. You cannot tell a sweltering, sleep-deprived public and a hemorrhaging industrial base that the grid will be smart and financially stable in 3 years. They require the fan to spin and the assembly line to run tonight.
That disconnect between future planning and present operational failure has caused a severe, potentially irreversible breach of public trust.
It really has.
So if the state wants to arrest this crisis, regain the confidence of global investors, and maintain its status as an industrial powerhouse, what are the precise actionable steps that need to happen next? What is the actual technical and fiscal path forward for true economic sustainability?
Well, first and foremost, they must achieve immediate workforce stabilization.
Right, the personnel.
Announcing 15,000 hires is just a press release. They must ruthlessly fast-track the actual recruitment, training, and deployment of those personnel.
It takes time to train people.
It does, but they cannot stop there. They require a binding, multi-year roadmap to fill the remaining 31,000 frontline vacancies. Without highly trained human beings to physically execute the rigorous preventative maintenance cycle on the state's 4.47 lakh transformers, the physical hardware will continue to degrade and catch fire, regardless of how many billions in equity you inject into the corporate balance sheet.
Second is the unavoidable necessity of aggressive financial restructuring. We established the crushing weight of the 1.8 lakh crore debt. The Ember report explicitly suggests implementing a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, to surgically address this.
Yes, the SPV is critical. The state government needs to mathematically isolate the roughly 55,000 crore rupees in pure, toxic, legacy operational debt that the state regulator has already legally barred the utility from passing on to consumer tariffs.
So they just ring-fence it.
Exactly. They must park that specific debt tranche inside an SPV, heavily backed by state-guaranteed sovereign bonds. Doing so would instantly free TNPDCL from a massive portion of its paralyzing 10,000 crore annual interest payments.
Which frees up cash flow.
Yes, allowing that newly freed revenue to be directly deployed into critical physical grid upgrades.
The third recommendation focuses on altering human behavior through demand-side management, specifically the implementation of time of day or TODI PM spike.
We extensively discussed the fatal shift in nighttime peak demand.
Right, the 10.30 PM spike.
The reality is that the grid has access to abundant, highly subsidized, and cheap solar power during the daytime hours. The state needs to implement aggressive, true TODI down tariffs utilizing those new smart meters.
How does that work in practice?
They must use pricing mechanics to financially incentivize both massive industrial consumers and residential households to actively shift heavy electrical loads, running factory floors, charging electric vehicle fleets, operating heavy agricultural pumps, and even running residential washing machines to the solar hours between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m.
So make it much cheaper during the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to use behavioral economics to physically flatten that devastating 10.3 p.m. demand spike.
But behavioral economics has a limit. You cannot shift everything to the day. The sun sets, but the ambient heat remains, and people still require air conditioning at midnight to survive a 41-degree heat wave.
That's very true.
Which brings us to the fourth and perhaps most critical engineering recommendation: storage integration.
Precisely. You must capture the cheap daytime solar and deploy it at night.
How do they do that at scale?
Well, the utility is currently locked in a debate between two massive storage technologies. The first is pumped hydro storage. This involves using excess daytime solar power to physically pump massive volumes of water up a mountain into a reservoir and then releasing that water down through hydroelectric turbines during the nighttime peak.
That sounds complicated.
It is. The state has identified 12 viable locations for this, but the economics are tough. It costs roughly 5 to 6 rupees per unit, entails massive ecological disruption, and takes 5 to 6 years of complex civil engineering to build.
The alternative is base battery energy storage systems. These are massive grid-scale installations of lithium-ion or advanced flow batteries.
And the global capital costs for BETA's technology are dropping precipitously, with projections showing a 40% decline by 2030.
So they're getting much cheaper.
They are. They are modular, they have a vastly smaller ecological footprint, and they can be deployed significantly faster than a hydroelectric dam. The state needs to abandon the bureaucratic inertia, finalize its storage strategy immediately, and begin aggressively deploying grid-scale BCSS to absorb the daytime solar glut and discharge it during the lethal nighttime thermal peaks.
And finally, they must actively rebuild investor confidence in the green energy sector.
Yes.
The sources highlight a highly significant recent regulatory victory where the TNERC, the state electricity regulator, formally ordered Tangedco to financially compensate private solar and wind generators if the utility arbitrarily curtails or unplugs their power for reasons other than immediate grid safety.
And that's huge because for a long time, since massive legacy coal plants cannot easily ramp their production up and down to balance the grid, the utility would simply order private solar plants to disconnect from the grid when there was oversupply.
Just to protect the coal plants.
Exactly. This bureaucratic curtailment cost green energy developers millions of dollars in lost revenue and completely destroyed their financial models.
Right.
By legally forcing the state utility to pay a strict penalty for non-safety-related curtailment, the regulator is sending a powerful, legally binding signal to global renewable investors that their capital investments in Tamil Nadu's green transition will actually be protected by the rule of law.
So, synthesizing all of this, the ultimate fix for Tamil Nadu's grid isn't merely archaic 20th century thinking, just burning more coal or building another massive centralized thermal plant to blindly push more megawatts into decaying wires.
No, that era is over.
It is fundamentally about shifting human behavior and storing power efficiently. Grid modernization is essentially traffic management.
Right.
You don't solve a catastrophic traffic jam simply by building wider and wider physical roads. You incentivize the population to drive at off-peak hours, and you build highly efficient public transit to absorb and store that excess capacity.
That is the exact paradigm shift required. Grid modernization is not just about laying thicker copper cables. It is fundamentally about smart behavioral economics.
Yeah.
Rapidly integrating grid-scale renewable storage, ruthlessly restructuring the utility's toxic balance sheet through SPVs, and aggressively managing consumer demand via time-of-day pricing are the only mathematically viable ways to ensure long-term fiscal health.
And guarantee uninterrupted power for a rapidly expanding, highly industrialized economy. Which brings us to the conclusion of our investigation today. The Tamil Nadu power crisis of summer 2026 is clearly not a simplistic narrative of rogue political sabotage, nor is it merely the result of a sudden, unpredictable heat wave.
No, it's much deeper than that.
As the data has shown us, it is a complex, slow-motion structural collision. It is the violent intersection of surging, climate-driven nighttime demand, a catastrophic 51% labor deficit on the physical front lines, a crippling 1.80 lakh crore rupee debt burden that paralyzes capital expenditure, and 7 continuous years of deferred preventive maintenance finally coming home to roost.
Yeah.
While the political opposition's fierce criticisms regarding the TVK administration's lack of proactive summer readiness and their frankly baffling confidence-destroying PR messaging about sabotage are highly valid, solving this crisis demands a sober acknowledgement of the deep, systemic, multi-decade structural decay that this new administration inherited.
It's a massive challenge.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative concept: to mull over something that extends beyond the immediate politics of Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
As we move deeper into the 21st century, and as extreme climate events become the baseline norm rather than the exception, the entire era of relying solely on massive, centralized, state-run power plants pushing electricity over hundreds of miles of fragile, thermally stressed wires might be rapidly drawing to a close.
It really might be.
Think about your own home or your own business. If the sovereign state grid is this financially insolvent and physically vulnerable to a predictable seasonal heat wave, how long will it be before localized, self-sustaining microgrids, neighborhood-level battery banks, and peer-to-peer decentralized solar trading become not just a niche eco-friendly lifestyle choice, but an absolute non-negotiable economic necessity for your financial survival?
That's a great point.
It is something to think about the next time you flip a switch and find yourself holding your breath, waiting in the dark to see if the lights actually come on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.